welcome everybody back to another edition of Queer Prophets Podcast, where we are all about three pillars: inclusion, community, and growth. I'm Diane Conklin. I'm your host, and I'm honored today to have with us Marcia Ledford. And as always, I am going to let Marcia introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself, and then we will launch into the conversation. Welcome, Marcia.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your kind invitation. My name is Marcia Ledford. I am an Episcopal priest and a civil rights attorney. I'm a recovering attorney, let's put it that way. And I'm in the process of starting a new mission. I was a civil rights attorney for about 30 years. Well, now about 30, better than 30 years. But I always felt the call to be ordained. Excuse me, my eye is watering. But I never saw anybody like me in the pulpit or at the altar, a woman, number one, and number two, certainly a lesbian. So at the age of almost 50, I decided to go back to seminary. And I am now ordained in the Episcopal Church, and I'm working on something called Political Theology Matters. And so it's an opportunity for me to write, speak, teach, and sometimes preach about the importance of progressive Christians, including us LGBT folk, to advocate for greater social justice in the public square from a faith perspective. People get a little uncomfortable sometimes. It's like, well, what about separation of church and state and all of that? And that's what I teach about primarily. I teach about how the First Amendment protects us to speak about our views, whether they're faith-based or not. The only prohibition regarding the separation of church and state is on the Congress. So, but we have a tendency to put that on ourselves and think that we cannot talk about what our faith tradition is with respect to social justice.
So let's talk for a minute about faith and being queer, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who have maybe a hard time, maybe even an aversion, if I can use that word, to quote Christianity or faith or church or organized religion based on what they feel like maybe has been, maybe some bashing, maybe some not so good feelings of sitting in church as a kid and hearing about this or that. How do you respond to people who talk about that, or what do you say to people who come to you with that challenge or that issue?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's something that we have to talk about more fully. I cannot count how many times I've heard a story from somebody who's been really badly burned by the church. So we have to just put that out there. And it's still going on. It's not like it has stopped. In some ways, I think it has gotten worse. When I told my community of women that I was going to seminary, a lot of them got really concerned or started just acting funny. They were worried I was going to proselytize them or I was going to impose this on them. And so immediately I started telling people, look, as far as I'm concerned, nothing will change. And, our relationship is not going to change just because I do this. And I don't expect you, for example, to become an Episcopalian. I don't expect you to do anything differently with respect to your own faith journey than you're doing right now. And then after a while, when people saw that I was true to my word and I was not bugging people, why aren't you going to church? And why aren't you, all that stuff. People settled down. But I think that I have to acknowledge the damage that has been done anytime I'm addressing a group of LGBTQ folk, my people, so to speak, because to not do so would be doing them a great disservice. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet that for most people brought up in a Christian tradition, it is rare if they have not had a bad experience. You know, it's really pretty rare. So, and I felt like I had to leave my church tradition. I knew I couldn't stay as I started coming out as a young adult. I was raised in the American Baptist tradition, which is, you know, they're getting pretty good on LGBT now. But I knew that there was not going to be room for me at the table in that tradition, which is why when Linda and I got together, these many years ago, she was raised Roman Catholic. So we found something that was a beautiful combination of really solid scholarship, biblical scholarship, and liturgy, which is what the Episcopal Church is all about. And I dare say it has been on the cutting edge of inclusion of LGBT people. Obviously, they had ordained me.
Right.
And it's an excellent choice. And we will continue, I think, to be on the cutting edge for some time.
Yeah. You know, I think for me, and you know, it's interesting, you know, I grew up in a traditional Christian church and had my struggles. And, you know, it's interesting to me, actually, the gal that I'm dating right now said this weekend, and we had a little bit of a conversation, but, and it really struck me that she was right? It's not so much about the religion piece. It's not so much about the church as it is your relationship, right? The relationship that you seek with God, whatever word you use for that, right? Spirit, you know, whatever, Buddha. I mean, it doesn't matter what word you use. God is the word that I use, but, you know, it's the relationship that you have with Spirit, with God, with your Lord, or whatever you call it, that is what matters, right? It doesn't matter what some religion says, whether it's Episcopalian or Methodist or Catholic or Buddhist or, you know, Hinduism or whatever, you know, I'm going to miss a bunch, I know, but it's that piece of what's your personal relationship.
With a divine.
Yeah, there you go. Right. And however you define that. And I think that's the piece that, if that's important to you, for me anyway, that I've sort of been able to work within and through some of those things, is that it's my relationship, and how I deal with that is up to me.
Absolutely. But that's not the way it works, particularly in most evangelical, more fundamentalist type evangelical traditions, where you are very much held to a certain code of conduct, and there's not a lot of gray area.
Right.
And so I heard a colleague of mine, a clergy colleague of mine, say something about how we spend way too much time allowing a horizontal influence on our relationship with our Creator versus the vertical one.
Oh, wow.
You know, we just let other things try and dictate what our relationship is going to be, and other than God. And
Right.
so we need to quit that. And he pretty much was that, you know, direct about it. But I thought it was a wonderful way, you know, stop with this and do this. Yeah.
Well, and it is interesting that this is always related to other people, whereas this is related to, at least we typically, when we, you know, the sky or whatever, as opposed to an up and down kind of, wow, that's deep.
Isn't that powerful? Yeah. I mean, ever since I heard that, it just stays to the fore. Nobody should be dictating what our ultimate relationship is with our own Creator. We are each created uniquely and marvelously, as it says in the old book.
Yeah.
So, you know, I encourage people. That was what I was doing when I came out. It was sort of a coming out when I told my women's softball community that I was going to be right. You know, but that's what I was saying to them. Look, I'm not going to get between you and your relationship with your Creator. That's not my job. My job is to facilitate it, but it's not, you know, wreck it. So
or change it, or exactly. And I think that's the other piece, right? Is that people are so used to being pushed into, you know, your life is wrong, or your decisions are wrong, or you're going to hell for that. It's that fire and brimstone stuff, right? That we all sort of have that like pushback against, right? Don't, you know.
And that's not our way in the Anglican tradition. We have what we call an incarnational theology, that Christ was put on the earth to walk a life like ours, to understand us, because God values us. And that's a very different thing than, always talking about sin and damnation and all of that stuff. I think it's very damaging to our psyche. I don't think it's good theology. I don't think that's what the Bible is really about. So it's just really important to remember our beauty as God's creation.
Yeah, that's great. So let's shift gears a little bit and go back and talk a little bit about what you're doing now with the First Amendment and that piece. Tell us a little more about that.
Well, part of what has happened in my life is I was doing Latino ministry in Southwest Detroit, which is where we have two large populations of Latino communities. One's in Southwest Detroit and one's up in the northwest part of the mitten, as we call it, this thing. So if you encounter somebody who says they're from Michigan, at some point their hand will come up and they'll point like where they live, or, okay, so that community is up here. So I became appalled at what I saw being done to families. I can't really put into words what I experienced. And I started working with a community organizing entity called Michigan United, and they would ask me to come and do a little micro homily about Jesus and the Holy Family as refugees when he was a baby and they had to flee to Egypt, at anti-deportation protests. And I saw way too many parents deported, leaving behind little children who are American citizens and frankly deserve better. I think everybody deserves better, but it really galls me that these little people are Americans and they're being treated like this. So over time, I had practiced criminal defense law for a long time. So it was pretty hard to surprise me with stuff, but this worked. This left me in a place where I felt like I had to do something more, and perhaps parish ministry, it was not exactly the right fit for me. And I've always been sort of that kind of person. I don't quite fit in conventional boxes. And that's not a bad thing. Believe me, sometimes I wish that I would. Life, I think, would be easier. But so I decided to pursue a doctor of ministry in political theology, which is speaking from a faith-based perspective for greater social justice in the public square, preferably to as broad an audience as possible. So when I wrote my dissertation, I focused on the need for immigration reform because it's just so out of hand. And then it got so much worse these last 4 years. So when I finished all that, I decided to start a company called Political Theology Matters, where, like I said earlier, I would advocate for progressive Christians to become more vocal in the public square. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm teaching, I'm providing seminars, I have an active blog, all kinds of ways for people to learn about what political theology is, and then of course to go out and do it, because one of the big problems we have is analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
But,
so what does that mean, political theology? What is it? Give me like a 5 or 6 sentence or line, like break it down to the simplistic, as Denzel Washington said in Philadelphia, pretend I'm a 3rd grader.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a good line too. I love that movie. That was a big movie at the time for us. Yes, it was. Well, let's say and by the way, this has a very interfaith aspect to it. I'm speaking from a Christian perspective because I'm a Christian and I'm a cleric and all of that. But political theology involves taking a teaching from your faith tradition and talk about it talking about it in public to encourage policymaking or lawmaking that will move us in a direction of greater inclusion and social justice.
Okay. All right.
Here's an example. Jesus always was talking about the importance of care for the other, love one another, feed my sheep. Okay, so what does that look like? Let's say Congress is considering, expanding SNAP, which is the supplemental nutrition funds available to help families that are suffering from hunger. This is a perfect opportunity to get a group together to go lobby with some legislators, which sounds really horrible, but it's actually not too bad. Writing letters, sending emails. I've learned that when an elected official, gets a big batch of emails, particularly if they're individually written at a time, they really pay attention to stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be a huge number, but this is a couple of nuts and bolts examples of how to do political theology, how to take what you believe and have incorporated in your life and encouraging better laws.
So one of the things that's happening right now is the equality law, right? So what I hear you saying is, for our community, for example, getting together with a campaign or showing up on the steps of the Capitol or whatever, right, to push that, to be able to help push that bill through to finally getting it, obviously signed by a president that says, yeah, you can't discriminate.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's important for us to advocate for our own interests, like that particular bill, but also others that provide greater inclusion, compassion, care, whatever you want to call it, for those who are less fortunate than we are.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, because I love having, there's always a line, right, between things. And so we can change it's my podcast, so I get to my opinion, right?
Absolutely.
So for me, right, it just seems like, especially with everything that's happened in the last year and in the last 4 years, but more specifically, I think in the last 12 months with some of the Black Lives Matter stuff, and certainly with issues in our community, it's just come to fruition for me, and really to the forefront, that, we can change all the laws we want. The bottom line is, there's been a lot of laws on the books for a lot of years, and we're still not all that much farther advanced than some of these social issues as we were 50 or 100, or it seems like sometimes 1,000 years ago, right? So, and I'm going to ask you this direct question, and it's not an easy answer. I know it's not, but so we can change the laws, but isn't it really about changing people's hearts, which is really what changes the world? And so how do we do that, Marcia? How do we change what's inside of somebody and turn that hate, maybe not into love, but into acceptance?
I think it's a really important question for us to wrestle with as a general society, also from an LGBTQ perspective, because we are so often either misrepresented or misunderstood. There are two things that I think will really help with that. As we engage in public theology, political theology, we are educating at the same time, hopefully. If it's done well, it's certainly providing new things for people to think about. And people say to me, well, Ledford, you just want to establish, a progressive Christian theocracy. Well, no, that's not what I want to do. The framers of the Constitution, particularly James Madison, they were very concerned about public debate, about being able to speak on political issues. And as a matter of fact, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that political speech deserves the greatest protection. So when we engage in debate on an issue, let's say it's about, food supplement, I think we are best served when as many voices from as many perspectives, including faith perspectives, come in and talk about it. Because as we listen to that, we start forming our own opinions. We become more educated. And that's education is the way that we turn hearts. Education and civil discourse, which admittedly at times I'm terrible at, but, and there's a training, I can give you a link for that later. There's a training through the Episcopal Church, which is free, and you can do it in your own time, and you can learn about how to engage in civil discourse. In other words, learning how to keep your temperature down, listening, trying to understand where the other person is coming from, those kinds of things. If you're, I don't recommend civil discourse for somebody who is like QAnon and just way off. I wouldn't go there. It's the movable middle, really, that we always want to be talking to. The movable middle and the left, that we can always get more engaged into what we're doing. So it's a function of education and civil discourse that I think are the best ways to do it. It's hard. It takes a long time. You know, we are 50 years since MLK marched on Washington, almost 60 years, 1963. Yeah. Yeah, we have a ways to go. We have a long ways to go.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that you said a minute ago that I think is also key, right, is listening. Because, you know, I've seen this, and I've said this for a long time. We get into these heated debates on social media, or even in public, right? Or we have a friend that feels differently about something, and we get into these heated debates. And the problem is, to me, is that you're screaming about what you feel, and they're screaming about what they feel, and no one's listening, right? We're formulating our response to what the idiotic thing is that they're telling us, right? Or the thing we disagree with. We're formulating our response instead of listening to and saying, well, you know what? Maybe I can understand how they feel that way.
Right.
So let's take that one thing and talk about that. Let's talk about how we change that. And I think as business owners, especially in the queer community, I think we have an opportunity that we so far haven't really capitalized on to say, look, here's a forum of business owners, right, who can make a difference in the world, socially, economically, inside of our own community. And so I think that piece of listening, and then instead of reacting, responding with, okay, how do we make this change? You know, it's one of the things I said this summer to a lot of my, you know, brown and black friends is, okay, you know, look, I don't understand. I'm never going to say I understand because I'm not you, right? I don't have brown or black skin, but okay, we are in a place where we need to have change, and I'd like to be a part of that. What do we do? Like, what's the next step? I want to do something. Don't tell me to send my money. Don't tell me. I want to do something. And I think we're in this place where you've got the big organizations, but we as the people, if you will, I think so many of us feel that way and yet don't know what to do.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we are working on through Political Theology Matters. I've also offered some trainings on the nuts and bolts of faith-based advocacy, what it is and how to do it. So it's kind of a slow boil, you know, Diane, we're wondering what to do. So we have to do some preparation work ahead of time. Like it's like tilling the field before we plant the seeds. The civil discourse training is an example. And that teaches you to take your desire to win out of the equation. It teaches you about the importance of really deeply listening. And I think to get started, that's the best way to try and start understanding, because for white folks, there's a lot of us who are at the very beginning of grappling with what white privilege is, how it works, how hard it is to undo it, how resistant we often are to getting into these very uncomfortable conversations, because they are. None of this is easy work.
Yeah.
And I would say read. I've got a really nice reading list on my website that you can take a look at, and just start doing some personal reading and reflection about where you're at. I know that Harvard has a really wonderful implicit bias test across a number of things: gender, sexual orientation, race, you know, all kinds of things. And I think it's a really good place to start to help you, because if you don't understand yourself, it's going to inhibit what you're able to do outside of yourself, obviously. And I'm in the process of writing about this. We all have different skills and talents, and it's important for us to understand what those are ahead of time so that we pick ministries, actions, whatever they may be, that are in sync with our skills and passions, so that we're not spinning our wheels or trying to do something we're really not comfortable with. A lot of us are introverts. I'm not, but a lot of us are introverts, and we're not comfortable being up on the front lines of a protest. Yeah. And that's okay, because we can't have everybody up there, because we need somebody doing work in the background. We need people doing research and strategy and all of that. It's mindful of the quote from St. Paul, for we are all one body in Christ. And if the body were all eye, where would the hearing be?
I love that. The things that you referenced, I would love, if you'll shoot me an email when we're done, I'll put those in the show notes so people have access to
I'd be glad to do that, sure.
Into that bias thing. I would love that. And as well as the training, because, it's interesting. You just said something that struck with me when you said it. You said the need to win. And when you said those words, it was like, it was, you made a softball reference earlier. It was like you hit me with the baseball bat. It was like, I have a competitive nature. And what I just realized when you said that was, oh my gosh, that's why every argument there ever was exists, because we all have the need to win the argument, right? Yeah. We all have the need to be right. We all have the need to walk away and say, I won that, right? Yeah. I scored more points than you or whatever. And I just never thought about it that way until you just said that. And what that boils down to me is it's ego, right? We have, whether you think I don't necessarily think of myself as egotistical, but what I realized when you said that was in the moment of needing to have that win, it is your ego, right?
It goes to our sense of the need for belongingness. And one of the best ways to belong is, when you're right, or you are an authority, or, people look to you for the answer. That's a great way to establish a very basic human need of belongingness. Yeah.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that.
I can't recommend that training enough, and you can do it in your own time. It's online. Nobody's going to be bugging you. You can do it at your own pace.
I want to go back to the belongingness thing, because I think that's important, right? Especially in the queer community, right? It's that piece of, and I just had this conversation with somebody just in the last, I don't know who it was, but just in the last few days, this piece of not ever feeling like you fit, right? And I think that we as queer people certainly have that,
right?
As the universe as a whole, as society as a whole, maybe in your work environment, in your family. And, I've often said, and I'll say it in a public forum, sometimes I don't feel like I belong in the queer community. It's that piece of, that entrepreneurial brain. And I go to a business setting. It's like, well, do I fit here? Because, I'm different because I'm gay. And then I go to these gay settings and I'm like, my business brain. Yeah. It's that piece of like constantly judging where we are and not ever feeling like. So talk a little bit about that piece of that need for belongingness, and maybe how that affects us in our community, maybe more so than straight people.
Well, I'm guessing you and I came out in about, the same decade anyway. And I started really coming out right after college. So that was 83. Linda and I met in college. We'll be celebrating our 40th next year.
Wow, so, congratulations.
And there was a time where nobody knew, and we were just kind of, huddled together, sort of waiting for the first shoe to drop.
Right.
And for any of us who have been through that, and I think even today, that's most of us, that's a scary time. Yeah. And we met two gay boys that we became very good friends with us, and they introduced us to the LGBT community. in Detroit, and it was such an important time for us. We kind of got our sea legs, as it were. And we started to get to know people and realize that there wasn't anything wrong with us. There wasn't anything wrong with them. And we made family. And back then, particularly, because mind you, the early 80s was the onset of AIDS.
Yep.
And AIDS outed us in a way that none of us anticipated would ever happen.
Yeah.
I think in some ways it catalyzed our movement because we weren't allowed to hide anymore, at least, especially not the boys.
Right. Yeah.
So it forced us out of the closet. It forced us into the public arena. It made us start claiming ourselves and our community. And I think that was it was an amazing time. It was a very hard time. People were dying. We were starting to gain some recognition. The movement gained steam. The out movement versus the in movement. There had been an underground for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And that underground happened because we needed to belong somewhere. We needed to feel safe. We needed to feel like there were other people out there like us and we weren't freaks. You know, that sounds like kind of harsh language, but back then.
No, you snuck into bars and,
and you
around.
I mean,
out in the boonies and, with gravel parking lots, if you were lucky.
Right. So there's an expression that we use in theology called living in the hyphen. And that, I think, is what we're referring to when you said, I don't know if I'm in the community, in the LGBT community. I don't know if I'm in, business community. Well, you're in both. You've got a foot in both. Right. And most of us have a foot in more than one place, including, that goes around our axis of sexual orientation. Because we all have various axes that we navigate. So we have gender, we have sexual orientation, we have economic status, we have education, and you can just go, we have ableism, we have all the various isms are basically function like an axis, and we sort of swing or rotate on each of these axes in different ways. It's very individual to us. I'm generally trying to navigate my axis of gender and sexual orientation and my whiteness. So my whiteness is privilege. My gender and my sexual orientation is disprivilege. And so we've got to figure out how we're swinging on all these axes to be able to plant ourselves in a place, in a community where we belong. And that's tricky stuff.
Yeah.
Really tricky stuff. Yeah. And it's true for biracial kids. It's true for, anybody who is cross-cultural.
Yeah. Or even in a relationship, right? I mean, I'm dating a Black woman right now, and I was with a Black woman for 4.5 years, but that brings up a whole different on so many levels, right? Kids and just looks that you get, comments that it brings up now that whole different axis of where that is. So there's just so many variables, I think. And, I think that's part of what makes us human and part of what makes it fun and hard at the same time.
And hard at the same time.
Yeah.
But, people ask me, or they used to ask me, and I think they figured out that they don't need to ask me this anymore, if you could wave a magic wand and be straight and, all of that, would you do it? And I would say, no. My life is too rich. And, we have had to navigate and go through some pretty difficult stuff at times, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's the path less taken.
Yeah. Exactly. So, Marcia, tell us what's the best business advice that either you'd like to leave people with or that you've ever received?
The best piece of business advice is, stick to your guns. If you think you have something that is worthwhile, that could make a contribution, just keep at it.
Yeah. Perseverance. Yeah. Gosh, that's great advice on so many levels. Yeah. So tell me what you think is sort of the most important issue that we're dealing with or that we need to be thinking about in the queer community right now and in the future?
Well, I've been asked, do you think we're on the right track now that we are post January 20th and we have a grown-up in the White House? And my answer to that is yes. Have we hopped the constitutional guardrails? I think we almost did. I think we kind of did a little bit on January 6th, because the reason to do that was to halt a constitutionally mandated exercise of the Senate by logging the electoral votes in their big book. That was really, really serious.
Yeah. So
I think we have two major concerns, and people are very frustrated about the trial, myself included. But remember this: every time we reference the Constitution, every time we talk about it, what it requires, what it allows, what it doesn't allow, we are restabilizing our democracy, because it's been pretty fragile. It's going to continue to be that way. I'm very concerned about the midterms. We have to be sure that we work as hard as we possibly can to maintain the majority in the House. If we maintain it in the Senate, I will be surprised. But, even having one chamber is so very important. And this is important for the LGBT community. It's important for any marginalized communities. It's important for pandemic recovery, all of those things, because I think the Democratic Party is best disposed to respond to the needs of the people. If we don't do those things, I'm very concerned about the erosion of our rights. Clarence Thomas, one of the Supreme Court justices, has said, along with Justice Alito, that they want to overturn Obergefell, which is our marriage equality Supreme Court decision of 2013, whatever it was. That's a concern. That's a very, very big concern. Yeah. The other thing is I'm very concerned for the trans community. I think that they are really, really vulnerable right now. And there's all these, there's attempts to stop hormone therapy for teenagers who identify themselves as trans and need to get started on that path as soon as possible. The earlier they start, the better for their transition. Sure. Transgender employment rights, all of those kinds of things. And it's partly, I think the bathroom cases kind of underscore their vulnerability, because that was for anti-trans rights advocates, the bathroom was the perfect foil for them, because we're all vulnerable when we're in a bathroom.
Right.
We all go in a stall and pull down our pants and do things, and they used that. They used that beautifully to scare up to scare up fear and inappropriate comments, hateful comments. Yeah. So I think we have to stay on track constitutionally by maintaining at least one chamber of the Congress. We have Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris, and thank God every day. So yeah, we're in a fragile place, but there's also hope. There's a lot of hope.
Yeah, a lot of issues. That's great. And I think you brought some things up that we definitely need to stay, I think, vigilant on. I think that's the best, the best term. So, well, Marcia, this has been great. Why don't you give everybody how they can reach you if they have, they want more information or want to get more involved or just want to reach out to you. How do they do that?
Yes, absolutely. And I welcome your emails. I welcome conversations. I'm happy to talk to you or talk with you about whatever is a concern of yours regarding political theology. You can email me at Marcia, MARCIA, at MIPTM.com. That's short for My Political Theology Matters, MIPTM.com.
And the website is?
The website is Political Theology Matters with an S.com. You can sign up there for a newsletter, and you'll get, we don't email very often, and the newsletter is periodic. Really what you'll get is the blog every week, which generally incorporates, if you follow the revised Common Lectionary, the blog typically has some reflection on the reading set for the following Sunday. So a lot of people are finding that helpful in their reflection time.
Sure, great. Yeah, and like I said, I will post in the show notes the references that Marcia gave with the different things, with the reading list and the assessment and all that, so that you guys can have that. That's a little much usually to give a URL on a podcast, but I think those things would certainly be helpful. So, sure. Well, this has been amazing, and as always, we managed to go down areas and talk about things that who knew at the beginning that we would go to, which is why I love having an open and flowing conversation. So as always, I appreciate your time and your sharing and your expertise and just the knowledge and the thoughts, different thought process, which is why I love doing this podcast. It's so much fun. So
it was great. This went by in a minute. So thank you.
Right. It's like I always have to keep watching the clock. It's like, how long are we going? How long are we going?
Yeah, this was a real pleasure. Thank you. And thank you.
Absolutely. We may pick a topic and engage again and do something at a later date, but
I would be delighted.
Good. So just as a reminder, I'm your host, Diane Conklin. This has been the Queer Prophets Podcast, where we stand for three things. We always try to talk about those three things, and we always try to incorporate them. And we certainly have today with inclusion, community, and growth. If you have questions, check us out. There's the Facebook group at Queer Prophets. There's also the podcast group, which is at page. Actually, that's a page, at Queer Prophets Podcast. Check that out. Or if you're interested in having the free report, you can always go to queerprophets.com, where there's some great business building information there. So until next time, make it a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.